News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
So this poll was taken a few months ago. Do you believe that if you were to redo this poll today, that support for Biden would have diminished even more significantly, given the events of the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just spoke to a colleague, and I can't name the poll, but they did a survey of Asian Americans, but not with Asian language support, only English support, and they find that the level of support for Biden versus Trump is pretty much the same as when they collected that data in April. So my sense from that data point, but also more generally, is that Biden lost support among Asian Americans and among Indian Americans in particular well before the debate. And it doesn't look like the debate has changed much of that dynamic. If anything, what we saw was among Indian Americans, Biden lost support between 2020 and 2024, but it's not like Trump gained that much among Indian Americans. Right. What you saw was a jump in the people say they want to vote for someone else, and a big jump among Indian Americans among those who say that they don't know. So I think what all the data point to, and this was true even before the debate, and it's likely the same afterwards, is a fair amount of dissatisfaction among Indian Americans who might have supported Biden in 2020, but are not satisfied with that choice in 2024. That said, Biden still beats Trump in a head-to-head matchup among Indian Americans and among Asian Americans more generally.
Dr. Ramakrishnan, what explains the drop in support for Biden, which dropped by about 20 points, according to your data?
Yeah, that's a pretty significant drop. Looking at our data here, as well as other surveys that we've done, including with the Associated Press and NORC, we see issues like handling of the economy as a significant factor for Asian Americans and Indian Americans in particular. So that includes inflation and general economic performance. On other issues, like on immigration, we see dissatisfaction can come both among Democrats who think he's not doing enough to advance immigrant rights, as well as maybe independents or Republican-leaning Indian Americans who think that he should be doing more to stem the tide at the border. So, but it's mostly about inflation and the economy. We did not ask questions specifically about competence, and certainly not something as specific as cognitive competence. But we see that in general in the data, when you look at declining presidential approval, which is different from favorability, it's very likely that in addition to particular issues like inflation in the economy, that his age and questions about his cognitive ability already had played a role before and will likely continue to play a role because the debate had exposed some of those.
Can you explain the jump in support for Trump?
Yeah, one thing I should say is it's within the survey's margin of error, so I think it's important to note that. I think at the very least we say that Trump held on to the kind of support that he saw in 2020, and yeah. So what is that? So it's likely Biden's loss when it comes to performance in the economy is very likely Trump's gain on those matters. Right, when we look at what are the most important issues in the election for Asian Americans, including Indian Americans, it's these economics factors that that are paramount. So that is very likely the strongest factor at play. And then other factors, healthcare is unlikely. We don't see evidence of a strong Republican lean on that. But on issues like immigration, we see other areas where potentially Trump has gained some ground, but not by a lot.
Interesting. So in the down ballot races, the House, the Senate races, there wasn't the clear Democratic support that we've seen in the past. Does this signal the start of a possible shift to the right by the Asian American community overall?
I think it's important to note that this is a pre-election poll several months before the election. So often what we find is the proportion that are don't knows. In the past, what we've seen is that they line up in roughly equal proportions to those who have made up their minds. So I don't see evidence of a shift, away from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party on the congressional ballots, because if you take away those don't knows, it generally lines up about a 2-to-1 ratio for that, in favor of the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party.
Yeah, what surprised me about your data was the large number of people who said don't know or not sure. Were you surprised by that as well, given the amount of media attention devoted to these races, I should say?
Yeah. The thing to know about the Asian American community is that you have a high proportion of people who don't identify as Democrat or Republican, or they might lean towards either party, but it's not a strong identification. And so what political science research says is that if you have low partisanship, you're less likely to make up your mind and you're more persuadable. So that's one of the factors. Another major factor is that the Asian American vote, including the Indian American vote, is the vast majority of it is foreign born, meaning naturalized citizens. Right. These are not people that grew up in Republican households or Democratic households. So, they don't have the kind of the party polarization is not as strong among immigrants as it is among native born populations. So those factors tend to come into play as well.
Another data point that I was surprised by, especially among the Indian American community, was Kamala Harris. Only 16% of Indian Americans said that they viewed her very favorably. Was that a surprise to you as well?
That was surprising to me, but I think what it is that it's part of this larger pattern. Harris is associated with Biden, and so it's seen as a Biden-Harris administration, right? So I think that accounts for some of that diminishment. I'm not sure how much additionally, some of the concerns about, say, her performance on immigration issues might have played a role. But yes, it is a far cry from what we saw in 2020, where you saw an outburst of pride among Indian Americans and South Asians more generally about her vice presidential candidacy. I think some of that novelty has likely worn off, but it's mostly a story of as goes Biden, so goes Harris, because she is tied intimately to him through the administration. Now, I think looking ahead, it'll be interesting to see how, the intrigue within the Democratic Party plays out, and if there is an opportunity for Harris to have to be a potential candidate for president this year itself, I think you'll probably see another burst of activity and potentially another burst of pride, if it looks like she will be a major party presidential candidate. We've never seen that before. Well,
Absolutely.
at least in the post-primary process, yeah.
Interesting. And did you find the same level of support for Nikki Haley?
No, and that's important, right? So when API Data did our survey with the Associated Press and NORC, the data were collected in October. We released it in November, and we found that much more favorable ratings towards Harris than towards Nikki Haley or Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Okay. And so the bottom line is partisanship matters first and foremost, even among Indian Americans. There may be such a thing as ethnic pride. And we saw, some evidence of slightly higher ratings for Haley and Ramaswamy among Indian Americans than others, but it does not hold a candle to partisanship, which is the biggest determinant. And partisanship itself stands in for differences in values, differences in policy priorities, right? So it's ideology, substantive stances on the issues, and partisanship.
This isn't represented in your data, but tangentially, do you see a greater turnout of AAPI voters when there are a significant number of AAPI candidates on the ballot?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we've seen in other political science research is that having, especially the first time a significant candidate runs from your community, whether they're Latino or Asian American, it makes a difference where turnout does go up. What we've also seen from other studies is that political contributions go up as well. So that's another way in which having more people from your community run for office starts this virtuous cycle of more fundraising for those candidates, and then those people then start getting pulled into, party giving more generally. So you can think of them as the kind of the gateway candidate, if you will, for people to become more regular political.
What are the three key issues you see campaigns needing to hone in on to capture AAPI votes?
The economy is number one, right? What emerged in the Asian American voter survey, in addition to the economy, is healthcare. And that's something that we haven't heard a lot about. Part of that we did ask separately about abortion, which is lower on the list. It's likely the cost of healthcare and potentially concern about, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act going away, or maybe price protection on some of these medicines going away. So that's another issue that has not been covered as much, but we're seeing it in the data. And then finally, what we saw in our survey that we did with the Associated Press a few months ago was racism and racial discrimination playing a role. And that, again, that's not something that's talked about, especially when people think about Donald Trump, the candidate. They think, well, people already know who he is. How can that end up playing a role? Well, two things. One, what it shows is that for someone like Trump, he likely would be doing better among Asian Americans and among Indian Americans in particular, if the racist rhetoric didn't get in the way. That's one thing. Right, he should be polling better if Biden's approval ratings are as low as they are, right, among Asian Americans, or at least that they've declined as much as they have. Another important thing to note is that it's not just about the presidential ballot. So if there are other candidates, that are engaging in racially divisive or racist rhetoric, that's going to hurt them. They're not going to win over as many Asian American voters as they think they might. So I think those would be, if I had to pick three, I would say the economy, healthcare, and then racism and racial discrimination. If there were two other things I could add on to that, it would be abortion, which, especially as it plays out in particular states, will likely make a difference, and especially because Asian Americans, by and large, and by 4 out of 5, support access to abortion in some significant way. So that's likely to benefit the Democratic Party when you look at abortion as a kind of wedge issue. And then finally, crime. And that's where the Republican Party is generally seen as doing a better job than the Republican Party.